jury of the people's court. Look closely. Your eyes doth not deceive you. The thickness has legs. I recently revisited 2004's animated hit The Incredibles and noticed something startling that my 11-year-old eyes could have never picked up on. Mrs. Incredible isn't just thick, nor thick with 2, 3, or even 4 C's, but thick with a capital Q-U-E. As I watched, I fell deep into the rich lore of Metroville, but the thought just couldn't shake me. Something about Mrs. Incredible just didn't sit right. The thickness was just too vast to not be malicious. That's right, Elastigirl had a dark secret hidden under those spandex. One that sang to the tune of 2 buttery Chicago bakery breaded biscuits. She was using her powers to obtain her form. But why? Exhibit A, motivated by love. Once you look past the witty dialogue and fast-paced action sequences, you notice a theme in The Incredibles that reaches further than Syndrome's overbite. Seriously, boy, your teeth look like 2 goats trying to hula hoop through a crusty Cheerio head-ass boy. Your teeth look like 17 daggers got together for a dinner party, old head-ass boy. Mouth looking like you tried to brush with everything but a toothbrush. I'm talking kitchen gadgets, that old couch from under the bridge, and deluxe copper wiring only found in the depths of aisle 18 at Lowe's. Now that I think of it, the true crime of The Incredibles is the lack of good dentistry, but that's a different video and I told myself I'd stay on topic. So, behind the high-flying acrobats, there's a story hiding just like Frozone's super suit, a story of love. The first scene we truly meet Elastigirl shows her and Mr. Incredible on the rooftop discussing their plans for the night when she does something unforgivable. Just before her slinky-like exit, she tells Mr. Incredible that,
"Well, I think you need to be more flexible."
Now, brothers, I urge you to be strong and look past the innuendos Pixar has placed so blatantly before you. There's a darker undertone that you may have missed. Just there. It's all in the reaction. She knew what she was doing. Proof that Elastigirl is not afraid to use her powers for manipulation in order to get the objects of her desire. Throughout the film, you see a husband and wife on the brink. A dysfunctional family just trying their best to keep their heads above water and fit in with the society that has rejected their true nature. Elastigirl, focused on family, Mr. Incredible, doing what he can to provide while forced to relive the glory days in secret. Naturally, the two would drift apart. Arguments here, disagreements there. I'm pretty sure at this point in life, the only long neck he was getting was when Mrs. Incredible squared up, ready to serve up a sample of that giraffe jitsu she had on tap. A truly unfortunate situation. She could feel her husband drifting away. In fact, one of the motivating plot points of the story was Mrs. Incredible's suspicion of another woman. I think it's safe to say that the only reason this family wasn't broken up already was because she had the cheat code. As a woman who could fashion her body into any form, it only made sense for her to choose the one that would be most aligned to fill the wants of the man she desired. She loved him so much she didn't care. If he said he was in a pirate, she would have been a boat in a heartbeat. But Mr. Incredible was in it for the thickness. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Isn't The Incredibles just a kid's movie? Why would I go through such lengths to prove something so trivial as Mrs. Incredible's body dimensions? Well, first of all, no. The Incredibles is a cultural masterpiece. And secondly, I'm a dumbass, but just because I'm a dumbass does not mean I'm an idiot. I bring to you Exhibit B, Pixar's Civil War. If we look at Pixar's works, it's no secret that the thickness is a way of life for them. Computer nerds like you and me, glued to their screens, rarely seeing the light of day. One could easily look at their track record and say, of course, Mrs. Incredible is no big deal. It's just a stylistic choice, and leave it there. But not me. I had to uncover the truth behind the implications. Why would they give this seemingly innocent creation the type of dump truck that would have Cisco heading back to the studio for a collab album with Sir Mix-a-Lot? Well, call me Morpheus, because I'm about to show you just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Most of us know Pixar from the numerous stories that gave life to our childhoods. Toy Story, A Bug's Life, Monsters, Inc., but very few of us know the story behind the computer animated classics. Pixar started as a small computer graphics division within Lucasfilms in 1979, just a few years after its original founders attended the New York Institute of Technology. Their primary focus was image rendering technology through their invention coined the Genesis effect. Essentially, they made themselves the masters of creating B-roll footage for sci-fi films like Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, all the way back in 1982. That's right, a typical story of the usual suspects. Spock's eyebrows were so thick, I just knew Pixar had to be involved. Unfortunately, they hadn't found their footing in thick thighs just yet. A mistake that would cause the small studio to hemorrhage money and lead to George Lucas selling them off for a measly $5 million to the OG apple bottom enthusiast, the GOAT, Steve Jobs. It was under Steve Jobs' reign that Pixar would further its technology and begin making a name for itself with nightmare-fueled fever dreams they called short films and fruit commercials, ultimately leading to their first feature-length collaboration with Disney, Toy Story. A commercial success by every metric, but due to the old-school mentality of the cartoon giants before them, Pixar would go on as the red-headed stepchild of animation for several years to come, flipping between the shady dealings of Disney contracts that didn't want to acknowledge them as the juggernaut they would undeniably become. While Pixar fought outside its studio walls to prove itself, a fight was brewing within. They knew, in order to save the studio and usher in the financial clarity needed to carry on, they'd have to be sure their next few movies were blockbusters. Only then would they be taken seriously. The stresses of the outside world would become too big to ignore, plunging the company into turmoil and leading to a fracture from within. Factions were formed, and alliances were forged in the fires of creative direction until only two remained standing in the ashes of opposition. On one side, the Bosom Bros of business. On the other, the Ass Animators. The Bosom Bros were a modest group, pulling the strings behind the scenes, cutting deals, keeping the lights on, and managing payrolls. However, the Ass Animators were the engine that kept the machine running. The Bosom Bros didn't care. They took one look at what the other side was making and thought, no way. They were willing to shun their creators in order to appease the likes of investors, all of which were also afraid of the thickness. But the Ass Animators wouldn't go down without a fight. They marched straight into the offices of their higher-ups and played the only hand they had left. In a last-ditch effort, they opened up the book of OJ and ripped a page from Johnny Cochran himself. You guessed it, they looked the CEO in the eyes and said, if it ain't thick, you must acquit. With the threat of every Ass Animator at Pixar walking out, they reached a deal. The Bosom Bros of business would allow the Ass Animators to create thick, voluptuous characters on one condition. It would have to fit within the lore of the story. The Ass Animators scrambled as fast as they could to make something work. What they came up with was someone who could manipulate their body into any form of their choosing. Mrs. Incredible was born. Still not convinced that Mrs. Incredible is choosing her thickness? Allow me to point you to our final point. Exhibit C, thicker with time. The year is 2014, and Incredibles 2 is announced. A long-awaited sequel promising to be bigger, better, and more incredible than its predecessor. It's only right that Pixar would get inspired by the world around them and take note. For the first time in a long time, pop culture was changed. The thickness was back and in style in a big way. the most notable of which would take place on the 2014 cover of Paper Magazine and Kim Kardashian's famous champagne glass photo that would go on to break the internet. Even though it was obviously photoshopped and oddly disproportionate to anything even vaguely resembling a human body, it was still a major win for The Thickness. In fact, in the coming years with the popularity of fads such as the Brazilian booty lift, alongside things like the workplace acceptability of yoga pants, The Thickness would continue to grow to heights that would only be eclipsed by the release of the Popeyes chicken sandwich. But that was still a year separated from The Incredibles 2 theatrical release. Upon watching, fans were perplexed. How could this be the same Elastigirl I grew up with? Well, the answer is simple. She wasn't. Many Pixar conspiracy theorists have already done the groundwork, mapping out the truths of a parallel timeline between the animated universe with our own, so I'll spare you the minute details. However, while using those theories as our basis, it would be wise to assume that the thickness of our world bled over to theirs. Seeping behind the cracks of every Pixar story was a badonk waiting to be discovered. This is the world that Mrs. Incredible was now living in. In order to compete and keep her place as the only apple bottom of Mr. Incredible's eyes, she did the one thing she knew to do: head into the lab and reshape herself into his ideal figure. Don't think this didn't go unnoticed by moviegoers around the world. One Reddit user, Spraying Shorts, very trustworthy guy, took to the forum with scientific, geometric data that dove deeper than the eyes and statistically proved that Elastigirl was a whopping 12.67 more thick in the sequel. It didn't just stop there though. Blog post after blog post, tweet after retweet, even USA Today tuned in with an article discussing the thickness of Mrs. Incredible. Seriously, I am not lying at all. This is a real article from a real respected media company discussing the thickness of a Pixar character. It even cites a tweet from the popular YouTuber Sniper Wolf in which she poses the question, how many squats do I have to do to be as thick as Elastigirl? Well, the answer is simple, Miss Sniper Wolf. 0, zilch, nada, none. It's impossible. You can squat every day for the next 10 years and it just won't happen because Elastigirl's thickness doesn't come from squats. They come from her superpowers. Now, I know I said a lot here, but I think the metaphor presented before us is beautiful and ingenious, and that is, true thickness comes from within. So I ask you, viewers, is the thickness in you too? The prosecution rests.